Hey everyone, it's Wednesday 8 o'clock. Welcome to Darren Stanton Live, where each week I plan to bring you interesting and fascinating guests to help us through not just this particular thing that we're all going through, but just to help give us extra skills and just talk to different fascinating people and connect with them, because you just never know how this person might impact on you in the future. So I'm very pleased to welcome Nigel Gordon-Johnson. I'm going to bring in now. Hey, Nigel.
Hi, Darren. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very good. Thanks for coming on tonight. Appreciate your time.
You're welcome. I don't know whether I can be interesting and fascinating. I'll try and be one.
Okay,
I'll guarantee them both.
Just pick one. Yeah, that'll do. So I'll just put a bit flash of your book cover. So you are the author of Find a Job in a Pandemic,
Exactly.
and How to Survive COVID-19 and Land the Job of Your Dreams. Who doesn't want that? So, and then you've got a second book as well, haven't you?
I have. I've got a couple actually that's coming out at the moment. I mean, they're more sort of like booklets and guides that I'm doing. So both from putting together resumes, also for job interviews, and then currently, which is where we've spoken about, is doing a whole series on body language to try and help people specifically around job interviews and what you need to do throughout that as well.
Absolutely. Just going to say hi to a few people. Our good friend Ian Timothy's just jumped on. He says hi, and Gary. So we'll obviously take a few seconds to get a few people on. Very interested, just kind of, I guess, give a bit of background about what you do, Nigel, and obviously how you came to kind of write the information you have done. Maybe give a little bit of a background on what you've been up to.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's interesting because obviously I've been in recruiting for about 20 years, and just about anyone, if you ever know anyone who's been in the recruiting industry in one shape or form, I don't think anyone necessarily chooses it. It's sort of, they either fall in or they're sort of dragged in. And bizarrely, I worked for about 10 odd years as a sales manager and a salesman in technology. And what used to frustrate me was loads of recruiters who would fire me a million CVs, and I would literally have on my desk a great big pile of them, and I'd be wading through them all. Half of them weren't very good. They weren't really telling me the truth all the time. And I thought, why am I paying all this money for these agencies? It's just crazy. I'm sure I could do a better job than this. And so that's how I got into it, is that actually another guy that I worked with, we both shared the same frustration, thought, we know a lot of people in this industry. Surely we could do a better job than this, and a bit more professional, and actually give people what they really do want and give them a good professional service. So that's really how I got into it. And for the last 20 years, I've spent both on an agency perspective, in the last 10 years, working for quite large brands, directly helping them develop their talent strategy, high growth companies, and the like. And for the last year or so, I've been working for myself, last 2 years, out of that. And I really wanted to try and give back to people and really help them, because in this time at the moment, we are literally seeing millions of people losing their jobs all over the world. And really what they're getting stuck with is that almost vicious circle of just constantly sending up a CV to as many jobs as they can get to, and then hearing nothing. It literally goes into a black hole. And so I thought, I know there's a different way to that. And I know from the sort of the insider track that in actual fact, doing that is going to really cause you a lot of pain for months, and you're not going to really get anywhere. So that's what prompted me to write the book, was to really give them a real inside track as to, look, this is what you can do. It is very different, but this will, I hate to use the word guarantee, but this is going to help you an awful lot to get round that, bypass the system and get in front of people, get interviews, and then be in a much better position to actually get job offers.
I mean, we had quite a lot of discussion the other day, didn't we, about all this, and the fact that, would you agree that a lot of the kind of, maybe the norms that people think when they think about applying for a job is they maybe apply online, or, send the CV off, they put the stamp on the envelope, or they send the email it off, and they think that's on its way now, that's all I've got to do. And do you think certainly within the last sort of 12 months that the whole thing's changed, or do you think it's been changing for a while? That kind of idea that, I'll just apply for a couple of jobs and see how it goes.
I actually don't think it is changing. This is the problem, is that, and what you say is exactly right. I mean, I'm probably of an age that, believe it or not, that was applying for jobs before the internet. I know it's difficult to comprehend, but I am. But I remember way back when, and I talk about it in my book, in that one of the first jobs I used to do, what you had to do was you'd find somebody with a typewriter, and you would type out your CV. Then you go to a photocopying shop that would be on the high street, and then photocopy about 20 or 30 of them, and then go and apply to the jobs that were in the newspaper. Now, all that we've done now is literally just taken that and modernized it into the internet world. So we're doing exactly the same thing, except we're not typing it, we're putting it on our laptop and we're uploading it rather than sending it, but we're just doing the same thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think in the old days, pen and paper, I can always remember that, and I applied for stuff coming out of uni, and a manager said to me, he said, if we want somebody that's more admin, so let's say receptionist or admin, we say, write in with your CV, because we know that the sort of people that do those jobs, they're more process driven. Whereas if we want salespeople, we know that they won't have the attention span for that, to sit there and write it out and put a stamp on and put it in the post box. We just say, call this number now. Whereas now, recruitment, is, I guess, things like Monster and that, and Indeed, because your CV is already uploaded, it's a case of just sort of like one click, isn't it? And you've applied.
It is.
Kind of.
Yeah. And it's sort of the worst thing that you can do, because you then end up doing a generic CV, which is sort of just one thing for everything. And all the jobs you're going to be applying for are going to be slightly different. And, the first tip I always give people is, it isn't just sort of some part-time gig that you're not going to do. It's a full-time job looking for a job. Yeah. And the first thing you need to do is you need to tailor your CV or resume for every single application you make. And I know that's a lot of work, but you absolutely need to. Yeah. And you need to mirror what it is that they're looking for. Otherwise, you're up against literally hundreds of people, if not thousands. And of course, they're now offering lots more different hoops. We've seen, haven't we, in the news with where we're trying to get more people to come in and give vaccinations, and all the people, these professors and doctors, are complaining because they're having to go through 30 odd different reams of things in their job application and take different courses and online courses before they can do it. And they're like, this is crazy. Why are you doing this?
Yeah,
I know how to give a vaccination.
It's like schoolboy stuff. Yeah. I mean, going back to what you said about it being a full-time job and applying for each job, sort of specifically. I mean, I guess, like a lot of other people before the internet became more prevalent, is I'd have like one cover letter for every job. And then the amount of times I forgot to change, like, dear Mr. or Miss or Mrs. And then they email back, great CV, but I'm actually not Mr. Smith. So I think you're right. I think you mentioned, I keep looking away because I'm just looking at the comments. You mentioned some frightening stats, really, about in terms of, the amount of jobs. What were those stats that you mentioned that we had to chat with?
They are terrible. Well, there was one in particular that caught my eye this week. I mean, I'm sure we all probably work out there's lots more people applying for jobs now. Sure. And there's two different ways I do it. One, I get visibility of how many people apply for LinkedIn roles. So I can see how many applicants there are. And those applicants now run into the hundreds for every role. So you are looking anything between 100, and in some cases it's nearly 1,000 people applying for a job. So, and that's just one. And so if you're just sending your CV in, you literally have a 1 in 800 chance of being seen. And of course, what happens is the recruiter who are working for this company, who are invariably the people who will look through all of these, will just find the top 12 people they can't even get looked at. No.
It's frightening. I mean, that resonates with me because, like, when the first lockdown came, maybe was it like end of March or April? We got some food delivered by Asda, and I've got talking to the guy, and he says, "Guess what I do normally?" And I'm like, "I don't know." He says, "I'm an airline pilot."
Wow.
I went, a bit for Ryanair. And I went, "Are you being serious?" And at the time, I don't know if it changed, but at the time, they weren't getting any money. He had no money coming in, and he said there was 500 people applying for this job just to drive the van round. He said, I've gone from being on 85 grand a year down to whatever it was. He says, and that's the amount of how fierce the competition was when lockdown first happened. The amount of people that was literally taking anything to get money coming in. So I think, as you got the scale, that's obviously going going to kind of expand out,
They're
isn't it?
doing that in Germany as well. I was talking to a German colleague of mine, and they said that all the airline pilots are retraining either as train drivers or
Right.
delivery drivers, that they're taking jobs for.
Amazing. But aviation especially took a massive hit, hasn't it?
Oh, enormous. But yeah, and the reality is, I mean, if you look at it at the moment, you've got people, anyone who is, I mean, I don't know how airlines are actually surviving. Or if you've got a hotel, a B&B, a restaurant, any retail, I mean, where are these people getting jobs?
I know I read an article a couple of months back with the two guys that started Airbnb, and I know the hosts were all going mad because when it all kicked off, they said, look, if the customers, if they cancel the booking before this date, we'll give you a full refund, including your booking fee. But then the hosts were going crazy, saying, well, hold on a minute, we've got bookings from now till Christmas. This was like March. If we've expected to give everything back, then we're bust basically. So I don't know what happened there, but then they're trying to please everybody, the guys that own it, but the hosts were kind of going crazy, threatening legal action and everything else. But I certainly think COVID it's turned a lot of things on its head, hasn't it?
Completely, and it's I mean, it is mind-boggling the amount of money that the country is sort of piling up in debt. I mean, that is sort of by the by now. I don't think we're ever going to pay that one back. But I mean, what else do you do? I did a bit of work with Booking.com two odd years ago now, and they similarly, I mean, their business is basically ground to a halt.
Wow.
But they had so much money banked that they were able to, they've always thought that they could keep going for several years without getting anything in. So they've got so much in there. But obviously there's only so long that they can keep doing that. And I'm sure that's what a lot of these businesses are doing. But at some point, when we come out of this, people are going to start hiring, and they will hire really, really quickly and exceptionally quickly. And that, again, is sort of addressed in what I'm looking at in the book, which is that we all have value. We've all got things that we are good at over a period of time. It's about recognizing what that is, and then being able to demonstrate that to businesses out there of what value you can offer to people. And I think you can do that not by applying ordinarily for a job. I think that's probably, in this day and age, it's probably the worst thing you can do.
And what I've kind of found out from people I've spoken to as well is that sometimes, we do have transferable skills, don't we? That we think we're only sort of fit for this particular work, but then we do have a lot of transferable skills that we probably weren't aware of that we could expand on. Because I think that's one thing I've found, again, is a lot of people say, look, I'm qualified in this and I'm just applying for jobs in this. Now, that's great, but, certainly aviation, things like that. What if there are no jobs? What do you do? So imagine that's something that's watching us right now. Maybe someone's in a stuck place in their mind. They've applied they've kind of scattergunned approached a lot of job applications. What would be your kind of first port of call to kind of stop and think about what you're doing? What would be some good advice?
Well, that's the first thing. I mean, the first thing is actually sort of stop. The temptation is to go out exactly that, put a CV together and just fire out as many job applications as possible. But I would suggest that the first thing you should do is sort of take that step back and think, okay, right, what am I good at? What is actually my skill set? What can I do? And then I would then plot out who are all the companies, who are all the kinds of companies I'd like to work for, I think I could work for, what are the kind of roles that I could do, and really brainstorm it. So really just sort of write down there, not in a sort of quick 5-minute, but you take a day or so of actually writing out constantly and just as crazy as you want to. And then once you've done that, you'll probably get a good idea of actually there's sort of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different things that I'm actually quite good at. If you're working in retail, for instance, you're going to have exceptional customer service skills. You need to have that. You're going to have sales skills. You'll have been trained in that as well. You'll have an element of marketing skills there as well. You're going to be good with figures because you need to add those things up. I mean, all of these things you can look at, and then you can start tailoring out what kind of roles can I sort of do in that? What needs a sales role? And everybody needs something to sell. So then you can start rolling those type of roles out, and then use the internet to start putting down different companies, different types of organizations, who they might be, and then you start building your own network of people. And then the donkey work and the hard bit is then finding the contacts to go and speak to, because even though I've been in recruitment, I'd probably suggest that shouldn't really be your first port of call, going to the internal recruiter or talent acquisition or HR.
Sure.
It's actually going to, if you're going for sales, for instance, you need to be going to speak to the sales director or the VP of sales or the managing director or the CEO. Try and get in front of them. So get to understand what your value is, but speak to those people.
That's brilliant advice. I'll just also bring in just a bit of comment. So Ian said the big issue is that the many highly able and qualified people will be now chasing jobs which are once the domains of graduates. In time, there will be a vacuum of new talent. It's difficult times for everyone. That's from Ian.
Which is very true. I mean, you are going to have that, and then you have currently all the issues with what's happening at university. I mean, I've got a stepdaughter who's literally just gone back to Scotland because they can travel if they're at university. But in the last year, or since March last year, she's not physically actually gone into the university because it's closed. Everything is remote. She's still paying full fees, but they still want their money. But you're not getting everything you do. You're going to get out of it. But absolutely, you're going to have an issue where people are not doing examinations. They're not getting. Is the talent going to be less qualified when they get there? And then obviously you're going to have a dearth of people who have gone from businesses and gone into something else, and suddenly those businesses are going to think, we desperately need these people now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where they're going to get them from. So it'll go from one extreme to another.
Yeah, and again, I sort of caught on the news earlier on about the education secretary said that they're not having any exams this year, no GCSEs, no A levels, and it's going to be down to the tutors to pretty much, I wouldn't say guess, but they're going to pretty much estimate what grades that person would have got. So it's a bit subjective as well, isn't it?
Yeah, really will be. Yeah.
I'm just going to put up the rest of my questions here. So again, CVs are always a big one for people, especially if someone's kind of been in a job for a long time. Maybe 15, 20 years, and they're a bit old school. They're not used to all the tech and stuff. Have you got any sort of idea, sort of top tips or advice in terms of getting a decent CV together? What would be your advice on that?
Yeah, I mean, there are, and I'll give you some links as well later as well, so that people can go. I've got some guides that people can have for free as well, with some top tips on it. But certainly what I would say is, first of all, it's not a novel, so keep it short. Yeah. Ideally, you want to keep it sort of a couple of pages. No more than that. And the real thing to bear in mind is really think about what the purpose of a CV is. And the purpose of a CV is not to get you a job, is not to pass your interview. It is to get the interview. Wow. So that's all it's there to do. Sure. Is to try and get the interview. The temptation and we've all done it, myself included, years ago, where you think, I've done all of this, I'm really good at that, and you're going to write everything in there. People just will not read it. They just don't. They will just skim it and just have a very quick look. So from a quick skim, you've got to have enough information there that encourages people to think, that looks interesting. I think I'll see them, and then talk about it a little bit more. So you don't want to give them everything. You just want to give them enough that sort of whets their appetite. So that would be the first main tip, is to keep it short and keep it succinct. There's a couple of others. One is, don't put your picture on it.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I wouldn't put your picture on it. And most people in the UK don't, or in America. On the continent, in Europe, they do a lot. But I would suggest not to. I have had some funny ones in my time. I had one guy, for instance, who sent his CV through, and he had a picture of a giant fish on his picture, but who was holding it in front of his face. Wow. This giant fish. I'm not quite sure what he was trying to do by this, but he was obviously proud of it, and he obviously caught it, but it wasn't going to help him get a job. So, but you don't need a photo unless you're doing a modeling work. Yeah, exactly. Then it's probably not needed.
And then Ian's put another point. It's very important to pull information and share information. Don't be afraid to talk to friends about availability of work. Build reference points of trust during these days of difficulty. I think, it's all about connecting and not being, not being embarrassed. And In terms of, I mean, for myself, I'll be quite open and say, as we all have. I mean, personally, I've lost so much money this year, but we all have. We're all in the same boat. If I'm having a full diary of speaking work and media work to having nothing, but what can you do? You can just operate within the skills that you've got and just do your best.
I think Ian was it. I think that's absolutely spot on. Working, sort of filtering out to your network is absolutely crucial, and that would be another. I mean, it's, again, I bullet point this all in the book, but it's one of those main crucial things of when you're doing your brainstorming bit and when you're looking at contacts, you need to write out all the people you work with, your friends of friends who are in the golf course, and find out where they've worked. What companies, what do they do? What companies have they worked at? Can they introduce you to people? Getting introductions into companies, getting recommendations for them to interview is the strongest way of ever landing a job. One of the strongest.
Yeah. And what's your thoughts on things like LinkedIn? Because I know, especially in America, because I spent a lot of time in America, they love LinkedIn, and they've got no issue if you contact them. But I noticed some people say, "Oh no, I can't contact them directly." I mean, what's the kind of general rule on, if you kind of do your homework and find out a particular person's in HR, or they can help you? Is there any kind of housekeeping in terms of contacting them on LinkedIn? What would be your advice?
I mean, LinkedIn has become more popular. It is the place that recruiters go to. So I think the stat is some crazy thing like about 96% of all recruiters in the world are on LinkedIn.
Right.
So if you want to find a recruiter, you can get on it quite quickly. But it gives you a lot of good information. I think it is a great place for you to be able to contact leadership type people. So if you want to try and get to the top and really try and connect with people, it's good. The one thing I would advise, it's the same like anything else, is that if you're just making a blunt approach to someone who you don't really know, doing it with a spam email, or you suddenly send an out of the blue invitation on Facebook or something, they may not necessarily connect with you. The way to work with social media, and LinkedIn is the same, is to utilize its content. So produce content yourself. So if you're on it, then producing content yourself to demonstrate what you can do and what value you can do to people, and also commenting on other people's content. So interacting with other people. So if, for example, I wanted to work for your company and I was seeing you on LinkedIn, I don't know you, but what I might see is some of the things that you're posting. So I might comment on that, and I might add you into the name. So I just put @Darren Stanton, it'll go in there, and I'll say, "Oh, it's a really good idea. I've worked on something similar before. I did XYZ. It really worked well for me. Hope that might work for you." And then you leave it at that.
Isn't it almost? It's more of a softer approach.
So it's a much softer approach, and that will always pay dividends. So it'll take you a little bit longer. It's not going to be months, but it'll take you a few days longer than just going straight at it, which might work. But then, to be honest, there's so many. I get all day. I will get straight approaches on LinkedIn. I mean, loads.
Yeah.
So and I will probably do what most people do, which is you look at it, thank you, I'm just not interested.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will probably engage with people who, if they're engaging with me on my content.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, certainly things like, I only tend to use Facebook for Messenger really and promoting small things, but the amount of people that will connect with me, and then within seconds, you've just got this diatribe of a pitch. And that's one of the things. I don't mind people contacting me and just kind of, building some rapport. But it's when you get this, or they're trying to sell me something straight away, and it's it's lazy. That's what the week. That's just lazy. You're not even going to build a rapport or get to know me or know. And then they show the cheek to say, "What is it that you do?" So they didn't even look at what I did. So it's it's just bizarre, really. I've got some questions here. What else was I going to ask you? And also with the kind of prevalence of technology now, because of things like Zoom and StreamYard, what we're using now, have you noticed any sort of changes with the use of technology? Has it become more easy or more difficult, or do people find it more challenging using sort of this sort of format? What's been your experience of sort of technology with interviews and assessments?
It's changed a bit. I think so. I think it's a slightly different kind of nerves that people will have on this. You're going to feel slightly more comfortable because you're in your own environment as a candidate, but at the same time, you're suddenly in a discomfort area. In other words, people will be looking what's behind you. You might have one of the kids flying in at some point. Are you going to be disturbed? Is the Amazon driver going to turn up? All these different things. So there's lots of different things which wouldn't happen if you were doing it face to face. Are you wearing the right things? Is the video all set up in the right way? So there's a lot of different things you have to consider and think about in doing it. So it has certainly changed the dynamic quite a lot. And when it first started, and a lot of my clients were all just saying, we're not doing any face to face, all we're doing is just video interviewing, it was a challenge for people because it was so new, and it's happening now all the time. But you have candidates who are going through virtual interviews, video interviews, have never met anybody, join the company, and 6 months into it still haven't met anyone.
Wow, that's bizarre, isn't it? It's crazy.
Which is really unusual, but that's happening all over the world.
I know a few people now that have just got jobs, and like they're getting their cars and my laptops sort of to curry it out, but yeah, they're just going to be off furlough, but they're getting paid, but just pretty much stay at home until we go call for you.
Yeah. It's a really different thing. My daughter works for the wonderful Facebook, and she joined it during the first lockdown, so she didn't meet anybody. When we came out of lockdown, they had a socially distant meeting with her team in the park, so they managed to do that. Now they're back into lockdown again. She hasn't met anybody at all, and Facebook have said anyway, a bit like Twitter, that everyone can work remotely until June this year as a minimum. So they have their offices, no one's in them.
It's bizarre, isn't it? Wow. And then what I'd like to touch on as well is, because I've done quite a lot of work on this stuff, is the idea of like the isolation, because it's okay someone being put on furlough and they've got no money worries per se. Let's say that they're getting paid, but if they're used to being in an office, full of people, or you're used to interacting with your colleagues, not having that physical interaction, I think certainly from my point of view as a psychologist, that can have a certainly now after getting on for a year, a detrimental effect on someone's well-being. So, could we just touch upon, maybe some tips or maybe some experiences you've got in around, people feeling isolated and disconnected from the kind of corporate world?
I think it's such a big thing. I really do think so, and it's I think it's a real challenge that people are going to have. I think it's going to be a real challenge when people start going back to work as well.
Yeah,
because at the end of the day, it reminds me a lot. I can never remember her name, or at least I can't pronounce it. I think she's still now Prime Minister of what used to be Burma. Right. And she was under house arrest for many, many years, and everybody was challenging it and saying how awful it is and everything else. And yet we're all under house arrest right now.
Yeah.
Essentially. And the difficulty, one of the most difficult bits of it is when you come out of it, because you've been almost institutionalized. And I think the ongoing mental health issues that people are going to have currently are not going to end when we come out of lockdown. And when we go back to it, it's going to continue in a different way. It's going to continue. I'm no expert in it, but I know how I cope. So I can tell you about what I do. And what I find solace in, and it's probably because I'm that type of person, is a lot of routine. So I create routine for myself to make sure that just because I'm working from home and I can't go anywhere else doesn't mean I'm going to lie in bed till 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Oh, it doesn't really matter. No, I get up as I did whenever I was traveling around, going to London or whatever else. So I will get up, I'll go to my office area, I'll be there for like 7:30. I'm working, I start work, so I have that routine. I'll have a break to go and get 10 minutes, and my 10 minutes is I'll go and see the wife and the little baby and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's what you have to try and do. If you're completely on your own, then I think you then have to make sure that you still continue in that process, but during the break times, book in with friends of yours, book in with a sibling, your mum, your dad, whoever it might be. So I think by having that kind of routine can help an awful lot and can keep you relatively sane, because you're still actually having purpose in doing something. The worst thing you can do is when you end up doing nothing, because that's where you have that cycle where you end up going down, and which sort of goes back to what we talk about, is having that awful thing of applying for jobs and getting nothing back, because it is absolutely horrendous. I know how bad that is for people, where they get constantly rejected. And so the temptation when you're going through that process is you think, I just want to curl up and hide.
Yeah.
Whereas you should be doing the opposite.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you've got somebody that has got that routine of maybe not even getting dressed and then getting rejection letters, I could see how someone would spiral downwards. I think you're right. I think initially, the whole lockdown thing was a bit of a novelty for people, the fact that we've got to stay at home. And then I think that's what came out of some of my colleagues, is that the temptation just to stay in the pajamas, but no, get dressed, put your work clothes on. And that they created, like you say, a routine and a very definite break in the day. And, and don't just do work on your bed on your laptop. Go to the area that you would ordinarily, maybe if you work from home. So I think environment's really important as well, isn't it? Is, be in the environment that you would normally work from. And I think I agree with you again that the fallout from this psychologically is going to take many months, if not years, because I don't think that's been sort of addressed as such, really. That people probably ordinarily would never suffer from anxiety or, not so much depression, but just a feeling of loneliness and disconnection. On some other talks that I did, the amount of people that messaged me privately and said, thanks for doing this, Darren, because I didn't feel confident enough to openly, sort of post on the computer. But this is something that I'm definitely suffering from, and I didn't even realise it.
Yeah.
So I do think it's something that's very important for people to be aware of.
And also people, you'd end up, you never really want to talk about it. Nobody wants to say anything about it. Yeah. And it's sort of twofold. One is that if you're feeling it yourself, is making sure you feel free to be able to talk to somebody you trust and love to do that, because people will want to listen. There's always somebody who will listen to you. And secondly, sort of pre-guessing the people who you think are vulnerable. So like my mum, for instance, who's 84, lives on her own. Now I know she's always been a very strong-willed, independent woman. And if you ask her, she'd always say, I'm absolutely fine. I'm perfectly all right. I'm quite happy here. But deep down, it must be really difficult for her, being so isolated.
Absolutely.
And wondering where is the end game for this? Am I going to be like this forever? Is this what's going to happen?
Yeah, it's tough enough for us, really, and like I say, for elderly people especially, it must be very, very tough. Just looking at a comment Ian's put on, it's worth watching LinkedIn posts from CEOs and employees of industries you're interested in working in. Get a feel for the people. It can take time, but it's worth the effort, Ian says.
Definitely.
And in terms of time frame, I mean, somebody else said to me, it takes probably 3 months to get a decent job. What would you say now would be a reasonable amount of time, do you think, I know it's not definitive, but do you think that's changed? Do you think we should have a greater expectancy that it's going to take a lot longer than 3 months, 4 months? Or what would be your views on that, Nigel?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's two different answers to that. So if you're doing it the traditional way, so do my CV, upload, and just apply for as many jobs as I can do, I think it'll take you between 3 and 6 months, dependent on what kind of role that you've got and what kind of skill sets you have, because there are some skill sets that are still in demand. There are still organizations out there that want somebody who's really good. So, a software engineer in certain fields are going to be very much in demand still for certain companies. And if you're top of your game there, then you're going to be seen. For us mere mortals out there, then if you're doing it that way, you are really rolling the dice a little bit. And it's just simple probability. I mean, if you are 1 in 500, 1 in 700, 1 in 1,000, you are just playing a numbers game. That's all you're doing by doing it that way. So if you then are doing this where you are looking at connecting and developing in a different way, so you're connecting using social media, doing all of those tips that we've talked about, what Ian, your viewer, also spoke about as well, which is how you connect with the real decision makers, starting adding value, then I think you can drastically shorten that time to do it. It does mean you have to get really uncomfortable. It isn't easy. And especially as a lot of us who are not in customer fronting type of roles, it's a difficult thing to do, to suddenly think, oh my God, I've got to try and communicate with somebody. I'm not normally going to do that. But guess what? If you were in their shoes, they would want you. You'd want people to come to you like that. And the real piece of advice I give to people is, don't think about it as you on your own. How do I do this? How can I do it? Think about it that what would happen if Richard Branson or Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg was in your shoes right now, where they've lost their job, but they had that mindset? Do you think that they would just be writing out their CV, sending it off, sitting back and hoping? Absolutely not.
No.
And they would probably get a job by the end of the week.
I think what you've said so far is really kind of expanded out from the traditional view of just basically sending a CV out, hasn't it? Like you said, you put lots of different layers on it now. So it's not just, it's not just kind of firing things out willy-nilly. It is about, really surgically sort of getting a process together, and then really seeking out what it is you specifically want, I guess, rather than just sort of chucking loads of stuff out.
Completely. It is a lot to get people's head around, because we are so conditioned that this is the way that we should be doing it. And from somebody who's been the other side of the fence for the last 20 years, I can tell you that's the worst thing from a candidate point of view. For you, the worst thing you can do. For the company, that's absolutely fine. I've got somebody who's working in talent. They can manage all the people doing that. And no one else is going to be bothered with it. I'm going to sort of trust them that they'll filter it out and find the right person for me.
Right.
And sometimes they do. There are some very, very good people there who work in that industry. But then there's also people who aren't. And they're also overwhelmed. I mean, you imagine from their point of view, if you're a recruiter working there and you've got 1,000 applications, where do you even start? Trying to get through them. And contrary to popular belief, the software that manages all of this doesn't help you at all. It really doesn't. It is down to human interaction. They will literally have to physically go through the CVs, not physically as in bits of paper, but online.
Interesting. Another interesting one, which is kind of touched on sort of how we met in terms of what I do, is I think in the past, if people are honest, maybe even if it was a Saturday job or when you were younger, people I think have told the odd fib on the CV, or maybe had a bit of a gap in the CV. And I think I mentioned before to you that it was always my belief, unless you sort of left on a Friday, worked on a Monday. So unless your CV was seamless, 31st, then you started on the 1st, it was a bad thing. I mean, can we kind of just have a chat about the truth about, the CV? That I think from my perspective is that, people that are interviewing you and looking at you from HR point of view, they're normal people as well. And life is not linear, is it? Life goes like this. So I'm sure people, will understand if you've got gaps. But could you touch upon, some people might be tempted to be a bit naughty in order to kind of get that competitive edge, or what are some definite do's and don'ts and advice you've got on CVs?
Exactly. Yeah, I'm sure if you put a CV saying that you were, a nuclear submarine captain and doing all of that, you probably get a lot of attention, but it's not going to help you. But it's the number one tip for that is be honest. Really don't lie. It's because it'll catch up with you one way or another. So there's just no point. So, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to be brutally honest with it.
Okay.
So there are ways and means that you can spin the truth.
Sure.
So you can always put a positive spin on something. And I think that's what you can legitimately do in your CV, and also in the interview as well. You can positively spin about something, but don't be afraid of the fact that there's a gap. So if you left somewhere because you didn't really get on, or you just, you were fired, or you wanted to leave in a February and you didn't find a job till November, that's still fine. But what you're going to need to do is you will probably need to account for that time.
Sure.
Because if you just leave it blank, for instance, which is that temptation, then what will happen is the interviewer will think, always think the worst. They'll think, well, okay, which prison were they at? You know, which were they? Wormwood Scrubs, was it? I don't know. Because that's what they'll think. Whereas what you should be doing is think of something positive that you did in there. Whether you did a course, you did some extra learning, even if you did it for parental reasons, look after a member of the family. That's fine. Just put that in. That's what I did. And I got a new job. I needed to take some time off. I did some traveling. There's nothing wrong with that in this day and age at all. Because
people that I've coached in the past have, they've often seen that as a bit of a red flag and stuff. And I've often thought, well, as long as you're honest, and again, some of the work that I've done in recruitment because companies are really clamping down on the minimising the risk now, aren't they? I mean, they want to get the person that's on the CV. They don't want to be spending thousands to the consultant, only to realise 6 months down the line that this person's, never worked in certain, as happened with some of the people I've analysed for companies. It's there's certain red flags that popped up that I mentioned a case to you, didn't I, about one guy was fantastic who was about to get this really fantastic job, sort of 200K, and it transpired the thing that impressed them most was a job he'd never even had. So I think, I don't know if what your thoughts are on this, but I think sometimes the bigger the risk, the bigger the person's sort of risk and reward almost. The bigger the reward, sometimes it's the person's risk factor goes up. But I guess you've got to be pretty extreme to front out the fact that you are running a bank in, and making millions of pounds for a company. You'd have to demonstrate that in some way.
But they still do it, as you know. There are people out there that do this, and I've similarly heard of bad examples of people who have been hired because they were running, they were the country director of such and such a telecoms organization. It turned out they'd never been there in their life. They'd never even visited the country, let alone worked for the company. And they only then find out, because absolutely, when they start trying to do the job, people start questioning this. I don't think they really know what they're doing. And then they start delving in and looking at it. So it can be tempting. I think it's sort of more problematical, those sort of smaller ones. It's the smaller little white lies that are silly, because the worst thing, what will actually happen, and this is, I guess you can answer better than I can, but what tends to happen is if you know that you've told a tiny little porky pie in your CV, and then in the interviewer then goes, tell me about, you talked about when you did that really great deal and you did this and did that. Now you will automatically, you'll have that little voice that will say, you're making this up. That didn't happen. I actually lost that deal. And so then as you're talking about it, you will probably do it in a way that the interviewer will think that wasn't very convincing. They didn't really do that. What you're actually doing is actually because you're lying, but he hasn't really thought that. He just thinks you're not very good at what you're talking about.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I will say to people is when I get called in my companies for recruitment and stuff, in no way, it's not there to it's not there to replace the HR process, because these people are very, very good interviewers, but it's there just to sort of support what they already do. And I've met plenty of HR people that are very, very good, at spotting this stuff. But I think you're right. I think honestly, generally is the best policy, I think, because another couple of things I give to recruiters, or call silver bullets, is that we'll say, we know that everyone tells a few white lies on the CV. So what we did is before we kind of progress you to the next stage, so they kind of infer that they've got through this stage, is we just want you to give us an opportunity now just to come clean. It's not at this stage, it's not a major issue that it can't be tidied up. And sometimes people say, well, to be honest, I'm not 41, I'm actually 47, or I never lived here, or I'm whatever. And it gives them the opportunity to come clean. But then that tells the interviewer that they have lied, and then they make a determination in terms of whether they're going to allow that person to continue or not. So it's a bit naughty, but it does give the person the out, because what I found is if you don't give, it's almost like catching a rat in a room. If you don't give it a way out, then it's going to just kind of stick with it. Whereas if you always say to somebody, look, there's no harm done, you've not blown it, but we just need to make sure that everything on the CV is correct before we start vetting you. Is there anything right now you want to say to me? And then I teach them to be silent for about 10 seconds. and it's quite a high percentage. Maybe 75% of people that have lied will say, yeah, to be honest, I actually left 6 months earlier because I didn't like the boss. Yeah, so there's small innocuous things that sometimes can help interviewers as well. So these are things you need to bear in mind.
Well, I know I never was a black belt in judo or something. I only went to one class. It was a taster session. I admit it.
Well, that's the thing, is that there's always, it's certainly the work that I do, like somebody said to me once, oh, you never did that. I says, well, it's on my website. Everything that I say is evidenced, because in this day and age, we're not talking pre-internet where you could basically say you'd work for certain companies and you could never vet people properly, whereas I think now we've got access to such data, such information, that things can be disclosed in seconds, can't they, really, for employers?
Well, I think I can think about that from a personal point of view. For my sins, I don't hide it, but I was involved in politics for some time, and I ended up standing for election in the '97 general election. I know this might put off a lot of your viewers, but I was on the losing side. I wasn't in a popular party back then, the Conservatives back then, so we got absolutely decimated by New Labour. Yeah. And but in order to do that, you had to go on an approved list for Conservative candidates. I know that seems bizarre, because you wouldn't think that any of these politicians have ever been gone through any kind of approval process whatsoever, but they do, incredibly. And at the time, and this is back in the 90s, what it was you would go off to a hotel it's quite a posh hotel out in the Berkshire countryside for a weekend, and you would be assessed. Now, before that, you'd have a number of different interviews, but this was sort of like the final residential interview, but it was a 48 hours. There was 50 of you. You're split up into little groups of 6. And basically you had an existing MP and an official, and they would stay with you and literally just observe you, put different scenarios, and just watch how each of you behaved and what you did. And one in particular I remember was having the interview with an existing MP halfway through the actual weekend. And they were asking me about various different scenarios. Why have you done this? What's your position on this? What is this? What is that? And I was a little bit playing the game, because I thought, I know what they sort of want me to hear. You've got to be quite loyal, got to be this, got to be that. So I did all of that. And then suddenly I noticed he had this folder down by the side of him. And it was something that I kept on sort of looking down. I could see it there, because we had no table. It was just 2 chairs open, so we could both see each other.
Right.
And anyway, he eventually pulled up the folder, and there was a confidential report on me that had been compiled saying top secret on it. And it was like, what on earth's all of this? Anyway, this is early days of the internet, and before we have now, there's no Google going around. They literally had everything that I had ever done. How the hell they'd spent that time going through that. They said, well, if your view is this, how come you did this? And he literally just read chapter and verse of what I've done 10 years ago.
Wow, frightening.
And that was quite frightening then. And it sort of dawned on me then, okay, yeah, you've got to be, this is not time to start trying to cover up for anything. No, you be open book with it. So, yeah, absolutely, I did that. Yeah. Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Give a plausible reason. And I think it's like the police. Some of the people that I've known or been aware of that have been sacked from the police, they've been for some of the most ridiculous reasons. Let me rephrase that. The thing that they did was tiny and would not have got anything more than a bit of a rollicking, but they tried to cover it up. And it's in the covering up that it becomes almost an integrity issue. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So, let's say they clip the police car or something and try to cover it up. Well, why not just go and say, look, my foot slipped off the clutch, I've clipped the curb, or I've clipped a door. No problem. It's when you try to lie, because then the organisation then extrapolates that out and thinks, well, if they've lied about that, what else have they lied about?
Exactly right. And that then goes back to what you're then doing in your CV, where you are doing that tiny little thing, whether it's I've moved a date a month or something, or I've said, I whatever it might be on it.
Yeah.
And then what happens is, because they then probing, because they think, well, something doesn't seem quite right.
Yeah.
And then it's you still covering up on it. So, I mean, as we go back to, it's just not worth it in the first place. Be honest about it. Take ownership of what you've done, and we're all human.
Absolutely.
None of us are fault free.
No.
So we all have them there. And one of the most powerful things, and again, if we talk the examples of the Bransons and Elon Musk, etc., of this world, the one thing they will always turn around, especially Elon Musk, is he said, I was taken by an interview he did once where they said, how did you feel when that rocket blew up and you were about to go bankrupt? You had literally hardly had any money and it's gone up in flames. He said, he goes, it wasn't great. He goes, but what I did know is that we would start having more criteria. We would learn more from that blowing up than we ever would than if we carried on having success with it, because we knew what was going wrong. And had we carried on with that, it could have been catastrophic 4 years later.
Yeah.
So you learn from those failures. Every failure you have is a real learn.
Yeah.
And if you can demonstrate that in interview, where you can say, actually, you know what, this is what happened here. I didn't work out in this company. These are the things that went wrong, but what I've changed because of that is this. I've become a better person. I'm much more effective with that.
You get clashes. Sorry to cut you off. You get clashes of personality in jobs, don't you? No matter how much you try and connect with that person, you can't get on with everyone, can you?
Not at all. And no one's going to expect you to do that. Again, you have to portray it in the right way. If you sit there for the next 10 minutes and say, "Oh, my boss, he was the worst person you could ever wish to meet. I hated him," and you can still just say, "Look, there was a clash there. Yeah, we didn't quite get on, but this is the reason why. But I was still effective in my role. I was a team player. I wanted to do this. I wanted to make sure that I was proactive, and I knew that probably the best thing I could do was actually to change career to do that, rather than stay there in a toxic environment and do that. So I thought it was better to do that. I'm still very good friends with other people in the business. I've got some great contacts. So you can still put that in a positive light."
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to see what your take was on that, because a lot of people have asked me about that. And Ian says, good employers see the worth in people. Some go beyond formal qualifications. They do not be afraid to tell the truth. In fact, there are companies who prefer to blend employees into their methods. Tata, for example, and Felix Dennis, who obviously Ian and I sort of really like, the publisher, actively encourage people to grow in Dennis Publishing and then build their own business. Yes, that's one of the things that he did, is that he wanted people to be better than him. So he would. Do you know about Felix Dennis?
Yeah, I've heard.
Yeah, I actually met him at just before he died. He did a thing called "Did I Mention the Free Wine?" Because he got into poetry. You probably know he wrote poetry books in his later years. And I was driving, so I couldn't take part. But in Birmingham, everyone that came in was just plied with wine in the audience, and everyone was legless. But it was, what a fantastic man, though. I only spoke to him for a few seconds, but he had the ethos that, come and work for me. I know you're not going to be here forever, but I'll help you. I'll advise you. I'll help you. And and if you want to be more successful, do it. Go for it. So, yeah.
And that's a lot of it is also, and I know it's a bit more challenging at the moment, where a lot of people are like, look, I just need a job, so I'll take anything. Yeah. But also, if you do that, where you're targeting the kind of organizations you want, there's so much stuff we can do on YouTube and everything else, where you get a real good sense of what the culture of a business is and whether you'd fit in with that.
Sure.
Is that the sort of thing that I enjoy? And you'll soon sort of work that out. So even now, at the end of the day, there are millions of companies out there. Now, not all of them are hiring, but there's still no shortage. They don't ever think that, I've got no chance, unless perhaps you're living in outer Siberia. It might be a bit more tricky, but in which case you might have to move. But of course you probably can't, because we're all in lockdown. So you got to do that. But be able to think that I don't have to go and work for a company whereby they're not going to allow me to do that. They are pretty hard. It's a boiler room. I don't really enjoy that kind of environment. Don't end up having to do that unless you really have to. Still push as your first priority is to go after companies and cultures that that you'll thrive in.
Absolutely, no, good advice. And for people that are watching that think, you know, I really like this guy Nigel. Like, well, how can they connect with you? What other services do you offer? You know, so if someone says I need help, I admit I need help. You know, what services might you be able to offer them, or advice, or anything? You know, what do you do consultancy stuff as well, Nigel?
I do indeed. It'll be rare if they say, you know, I really like this guy, Nigel. But in the unlikely event that they do. But no, I have my own consultancy, which is Aluminium Cloud. So that actually works for companies.
Yeah.
So I do strategic delivery of talent management, talent strategy for various different companies. They tend to be mostly technology companies, some fairly large corporates, large brands. And then I also help individuals as well. And the individuals I help, you can also push and connect with me via Aluminium Cloud, but also I will give you all the links for it as well, but it's via nigelgj.com.
Sure.
And what you will do on there is I do a number of different things for individuals where it's helping them, literally what we've been talking about today. Fantastic. Putting resumes together, what you should do in an interview, how you need to get a job, what you can do to try and change things. If anything, sort of give people a bit more confidence that in actual fact, there is a different way there. There is a better way out there. You're not going to be consigned to having to look for a job for the next 6 months. It doesn't have to be that way. You know, there are different ways of doing it. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Nigel Gordon Johnson. I'm relatively easy to find, but on just about every other social media. So on Twitter, I'm Nigel GJ. On Instagram, Nigel GJ Runs. Nigel GJ on Facebook. So connect with me on all of those.
I'll put those links on so people can connect with you.
Yeah.
Want to reach out. So again, just give your book another quick plug. So is it on Amazon as well, your book?
It is both. It is on Amazon. If you want to pay for it, it is on Amazon. If people want to, I will also give you the links to it. I'm actually doing a promotion where I'm offering the ebook for free. So I will get that out to you as well, so people can have that and download it for free. I want to, at the end of the day, the whole purpose of the book was to really try and help people rather than try and become a millionaire out of it. You know, so there is elements. You can do it on, if you have Kindle Unlimited, it'll be free and it's available on that as well. But I will give you the link and people will be able to download that for nothing. So
fantastic. Well, we're coming up to the hour, so it's gone really fast. I mean, it's just shows, you know, you're having a good discussion, a good talk. Time goes nowhere, but it's been an absolute pleasure. And that's one of their big thanks for coming on tonight, because I know you're busy, and you know, it means a lot. And I'm sure people are going to get a great deal of value from listening to you tonight. So thank you very much. You're
absolutely welcome. It's been a pleasure as ever, Darren, as well. So, and I hope it's been useful for people.
Absolutely. If you're still on the line, we'll have a little bit of a chat after.
Sure.
But, anybody got any final questions for Nigel before we begin to wrap this up tonight? Anybody else got anything they'd like to ask? Yeah, so Ian says, thanks a lot, really enjoyed it. And let's have a quick look before we wrap it up. Yeah, so I think we're there. So thanks very much for watching, everybody. We'll have a different guest next week, Wednesday, 8 p.m. Thanks very much for watching, and I will post the links in case you guys want to reach out and connect with Nigel. So thanks very much. Have a good rest of the week, and be safe. Take care.